Watch video footage of the protesters outside the Seattle Public Library during last weekend's feminist event, and you'll notice one particular detail immediately. The presence of large, loud, pissed-off men. Men who are unmistakably male in their size, behavior, and presentation, shouting at the top of their lungs slogans like "No hate, no fear, all genders are welcome here." All genders, but not members of the female sex who refuse to fall in line, evidently. No hate and no fear except for the hate and fear these men and their handmaidens feel in reaction to a handful of women brave enough to organize in the heart of liberal trans cult territory, despite all the threats levied at them. Hate and fear are the only explanations for the pathetic attempts men made to prevent Meghan Murphy, Lierre Keith, Saba, Malik, and Dansky from talking in a public space before a full house of women wanting to hear them. Hatred of women and lesbians, fear of female truth-telling and disobedience. Were these female panelists suggesting that all members of the trans cult should be raped, tortured, killed, forced into poverty and homelessness, barred from employment and secure housing, harassed, bullied, etc.? No. They gathered simply to discuss the ramifications of gender identity replacing biological sex. The real oppression of females going on at the hands of males pretending to be women or genderqueer and non-binary. Notice that during all these years, the ranks of gender-critical, gender abolitionist, and radical feminist women have been growing, raising their consciousness about gender and sex and speaking out against the trans cult. Never have any of these women protested a trans event. Not once, not anywhere. No woman has turned up at a pride parade, a transgender talk, or an LGBT organization to say that trans activists and their supporters should be shut down, kicked out, punched, killed, or raped. You will not find any self-identified gender-critical, gender abolitionist, or radical feminist woman online even sending death and rape threats to men in drag, women in drag, and their supporters under cover of anonymity. The violence and threat of violence here is one-sided and always has been. Yet women peacefully gathering and talking with each other are painted as the violent threats. Leftists and liberals go so far as to call women fascists for pointing out we are biologically female and holding firm on our physical and sexual boundaries against men. Anyone with a working brain who's paying attention here knows that radical feminists and other women opposed to gender identity are no more a threat to cross-dressing people's lives, jobs, and physical safety than lambs are to wolves. The trans cult and their supporters don't crusade to shut down feminist events about gender identity because they fear for their lives and physical security. They desperately try to shut us up because they're afraid more women will hear us and see these men for what they really are. Misogynists, sexual fetishists, and deviants attempting to force the world to participate in their fantasies, lesbian haters seeking to rape and dominate the real lesbians of the world, or at least make us disappear. This is not the first time the police have been the only protection for organizing feminists from male threats of violence. It will not be the last. So many women, especially black women, other women of color, and visible lesbians have good reason to be wary of the cops. Yet here we are relying on them to prevent rabidly angry men from assaulting us before a crowd of witnesses. We can't take these threats lightly, as their frequency and aggression online and offline demonstrate the rage and misogyny men and their handmaidens harbor toward feminist and lesbian women at all times. Men in drag have already raped women, killed women, physically attacked women. They openly state any woman in the feminist camp who denounces them should be punched or shot, claiming such women are not human, and go so far as to dox anti-gender identity women, attempt to get them fired, and campaign to have them shut out of their local communities on pain of physical and sexual violence. They call this justice and humanitarianism. The trans cult and their supporters do their best to gaslight us into disbelieving these facts despite the mountain of ongoing evidence, but we know what's real. We have the screenshots, the messages, the personal experiences of one-on-one harassment. Whatever your beliefs or your politics, whatever your feelings about gender identity, you should be able to recognize that in a free society, Everyone should be able to safely, peacefully organize and hold discussions in public places. Without these fundamental rights, we are on the fast track to a truly oppressive, repressive, dangerous society. American women should appreciate the stark difference between our situation and that of women in Canada and the UK, two countries very similar to us historically, politically, ethnically, and culturally. In less than a decade, these two other countries have sold out wholesale to the trans cult, restricting women's ability to merely express their disagreement with gender identity ideology, and setting a precedent for women losing their jobs and their businesses for refusing to call a man and drag a woman, or refusing to touch a man and drag's genitals against their will. The feminist action that took place at the Seattle Public Library can no longer happen in Canadian or British libraries and other public venues. Women there are too afraid to even admit in their personal social networks that they believe biological sex is real and significant. That the head librarian of Seattle Public Library, a Black American man, refused to fold to protesters of the feminist event because he supports the right of all Americans to express their views is a testament to the uniquely American commitment to freedom of speech. While we still have the right to speak and the right to organize publicly in the United States, regardless of what views we hold, we better use those rights. We take them for granted here, unaware that so many other countries grant their citizens no such freedom or protection. And we believe these rights are permanent when they can be taken away far more easily and quickly than we imagine. The mainstream liberal press here in the US is, of course, not reporting on the feminist event or the protest against it with complete honesty. So far, most outlets have ignored the weekend talk entirely, and the ones that have covered it say next to nothing about the actual views of the feminist panelists who spoke at the library, instead emphasizing how protesters feel the event was bigoted against trans-identified people. We can't expect better at this point, but it serves us to take note of how this media response ultimately feeds into the public's misunderstanding of the gender identity question and the trans versus feminist feud. Mainstream media bias works against women in this case, and all we can do is continue telling the truth every chance we get and documenting as much as possible.